It was clear I was dying, my body was shutting down, but there was no clear answer. I didn't have doctors telling me, oh, you're safe, you can do this. They were telling me I was gonna die and to accept it because we can't treat you. I had a feeling in my heart that there was something that I was sent here to do. That greater purpose of turning everything I had gone into purpose was one of the major motivators for me to keep going. It was also the real introduction to me of the intricate mind-body connection, because it helped save my life. I had nights where I literally was too afraid to go to sleep. I felt so close to death. I had days I couldn't even utter a word. It's a very scary place to be when you realize the amount of energy it takes to speak. I did not realize what was happening to my nervous system. When you go through a prolonged physical, mental or emotional experience that is stressful, your system starts to break down. The emotional brain starts to take over and you're living in survival. That becomes the default. No changes can happen for you in your brain, in your life, until you take radical responsibility, dominion over your own mind, your own body every single day. That's the beautiful protective mechanism of the brain. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't be able to have these horrible things happen in our lives and make it through.
Going to the bottom of our brokenness is actually paradoxically what healing needs.
But brokenness is not negative. It actually can be beautiful because that gives us a choice and chance now to rebuild.
I love the fact that you had this crazy journey. And I mean, like, it's been a journey for you to get here. Yes. For you to arrive at this Perota table, you've been through multiple heroes' journeys.
Yeah.
Like big ones, which I was honestly impressed and I was emotional. I was actually watching it this morning and the video of you at 13, just like, it got me. I got a lump in my throat because I thought, wow, if I was 13 and somebody like a doctor that you're supposed to trust tells me, you'll never do what you love again, and good luck getting married.
Yeah.
I would probably tell them to fuck off.
I kind of did.
That's where I'd start it all.
In all truthfulness, I'm so grateful. I think one of the greatest gifts actually was in that moment. My mom gave me space to respond because my mom's a fighter. She is my hero. And I can only imagine her wanting to jump in there. I mean, when the doctor just finished telling me, yeah, you're not going to live past your teenage years, never dance again, never have children, never get married, never live a normal active life. And the sooner you accept this, the easier it's going to be for you to come to terms with your reality. Right? And just that all laid out. I'm 13 years old, was the epitome of health like a month prior. And I can only imagine, especially as a mother now, I would have a lot to say about that. And she gave me space to respond, which I have just come to realize how important that was, because that really was the first most defining moment of my life, to take this in. And I remember, I mean, feeling like someone had just knocked the life out of me. Like, how did this happen to me? How is this my life? Yeah. How am I being told this? And just looking down and trying to wrap my head around it. And then just making the most important decision I had yet was to look up and say, I don't accept this. Like, I don't know what I have. I don't know what I'm dying from. I don't know how we're going to heal this. You're sending me home to die, but I'm not going to just accept that at 13 years old, this is it. And that my body doesn't have the capacity to fight this. And I didn't know anything with neuroscience like I know today, but I had this innate belief inside that if I just accept it, then any chance of survival was gone. And so they sent in a psychologist to talk to me. Isn't that crazy? 13 years old, because they said I was living in denial of my reality.
Oh, I think the same thing happened to Hal Elrod. He technically died from a car accident. He's been on the podcast. Yeah. And they did the same thing.
Yes.
It's like they're so focused. And I think they're coming from the Western system. They're coming from a good place.
Absolutely.
I don't innately think that anybody wants to be a physician or a caregiver because they have evil on their heart. I think that they just make little deals with themselves, maybe with the devil along the way, where they want to care for people, but they also have to take care of their sales and take care of their KPIs and all the things that happen in hospitals. It's so wild. It's almost like they get imprinted, they being the doctors or the caregivers, and then they give that same imprint to you. Like literally, if your way of thinking or being doesn't match with theirs, and how can we extrapolate that on a societal perspective where that plays out in all aspects of human existence? What was it exactly? So what was the thing that they said you'd never recover from? What was it?
That's the most interesting part of all that me and God are going to have a discussion with one day. I still to this day, I'm not sure. I had a rare viral infection. Now let's go back. This was 27 years ago. So even the world was very different. Like our access, functional medicine didn't exist, right? Homeopathy did and other things, but you had no social media, no Google, no YouTube, no podcasts like this. You had to find those people. And it was such a stereotype of like the lady with dreadlocks burning incense. You know, it wasn't really understood or respected, and it wasn't mainstream the way that it was and is today. So at the time, the best they could tell me, I mean, and I had every test scan known to man. Like I would pray that something would come out positive just to know what we're fighting, and therefore like, what is our game plan?
Yeah.
But it was like straight out of the TV show House. That was years ago. If you've ever watched that, he was a rare doctor, the one that was like the
guy with the cane.
Yes. And he got all the mystery people, right? That no one could figure out. That's who I was. I was literally dying. My body was shutting down. Like my skin was yellow from my liver shutting down. My hair was falling out. I got down to 90 pounds. I literally looked like a prisoner from a concentration camp. I was so frail. It was clear I was dying. My body was shutting down, but there was no clear answer. It was, you have some rare viral infection. We don't know. We can't treat. Therefore, you need to accept like, this is it, right? Because we can't treat you. And my mom, thankfully, I think, I mean, I had a deep belief inside. My life was made for more than 13 years. And that I had this incredible body that, yes, was facing Goliath, right? Facing the biggest mountain. And the hardest part was the uncertainty of it all. Like, what are we fighting? But if I give my body every resource and tool, both from a physical standpoint, mental, emotional, spiritual, I believe it was designed to heal. And it might be a road, and it was 4 years fighting between life and death.
And then again in your 20s, which we'll unpack later.
Yes, my 30s actually,
your 30s, yeah.
But my body, it was a long journey, but we just kept going, and I kept fighting. And it was also the real introduction to me of the intricate mind-body connection, because it helped save my life. I had nights where I literally was too afraid to go to sleep. I felt so close to death. I had days I couldn't even utter a word. Like, it's a very scary place to be when you realize the amount of energy it takes to speak. You know, it's something we do so effortlessly, even to lift a finger. I had days I didn't even have the strength to hold a book. And so I was there. Like, I can tell you, I know what it feels like where your body is right there teetering on the edge. And so I wouldn't go to sleep some nights. I would will my body to stay awake, because I really felt like if I surrendered that conscious will to live, my body was so tired. It was so exhausted. It was so sick. And so I would stay up and I would tell my body to keep fighting and to keep living. And that's when I really lived how powerful the mind-body connection is, and that the brain and the body are always communicating, and to either help us and heal, or to literally, I know if I had said, I'm done, right? And we've seen this with soldiers who kind of give up the will to live, and they'll go in a corner and they'll die. And not because of any real physiological reason.
Yeah.
I could have done that. I really felt that way. But I just had this such strong desire to live and felt like I was created to keep living. And that's when I realized how powerful that connection was.
It's such a powerful spiritual question that maybe has no answer. Like, I believe in a higher power. It doesn't mean that it's a bearded dude in the sky, but I definitely believe that there's an omnipresent energy that loves and guides all things. And I kind of really enjoy the wisdom of the Tao, where it's the middle way, you know, not too hot, not too cold. The great Tao loves and nourishes all things, but it doesn't lord it over them. Mm-hmm. You know, you do things for your husband. He does things for you, not because you have to, but because you love them and you want to. But what about that, I guess, almost dichotomy of like love, hate, life, death? I wonder what makes us do that for ourselves. Like there's some special thing inside of you that maybe doesn't exist in everyone. It doesn't mean that you're better, it just means that you're different. So there was something inside of you that was like, not only am I not going to die, I'm going to create meaning from this, which is a totally different construct than just like, I'm going to make it through. I look at the phrases out there. I don't know how you feel about this. Fuck cancer, cancer survivor, the kind of neurolinguistics and what that's telling the unconscious mind that I'm a warrior, that I'm an overcomer. It's like, well, you're just going to keep attracting more of that.
Well, that's a part of my story. Absolutely. I was a fighter, right? And I'm not saying that at certain times in our life, we have to access that. The fight or flight mechanism is for our survival. And it's this beautiful thing that when we can access it, helps us survive, helps us do amazing things.
In a season.
And that's forever. The key, not forever. Yeah. And that's a huge part of my work today, if not the whole root of it, is then we get stuck living in it. And society also, in many different mechanisms, we're pushed to do so in all directions. But my system got hardwired into survival without me really realizing, right? Because not many people live in that type of dire situation for 4 years, where every day is an uncertainty. Every day you're trying to will your body to live. All the experts don't have answers. You're just believing. And I absolutely have always believed in God. And that was a huge source for me. I had a feeling in my heart, as many of us do, that there was something that I was sent here to do, right? Something greater. And that pushed me, that greater purpose of turning everything I had gone into purpose was one of the major motivators for me to keep going, because it wasn't easy. It would have been easier in that moment to say, this is too tough. I don't want to live like this. But it was that greater meaning that I think all of us, well, a lot of us have, that no one else can really see or understand, but it's something on your heart that tells you to keep going right through those seasons of survival. But I did not realize what was happening to my nervous system, right? And we know that when you go through a prolonged physical, mental, or emotional experience that is stressful, your system starts to break down. And the emotional brain starts to take over, which really puts your body now in this hypervigilant, overprotective setting, and you're living in survival. That becomes the default. I didn't realize that consciously, right? I was like, I'm a fighter. I survived this. And then when I got over it, I was like, I'm going to go live my life, like seize the day. So I wasn't like feeling like I was living in survival. I wasn't operating, but I had this stress system running that I could feel, like you couldn't see. I had a hard time. Here I am. I went back to dance. I'm a professional dancer. I have a hard time breathing deeply, like as if my system wouldn't let me. And we know to do so is to let go, is to truly trust. And
there was no chill.
I'm safe.
Ashley had no chill.
No chill. No chill. I was your type A, right? Went to school on an academic scholarship, cried when I got my first A minus, like felt like a failure, which took me many years to understand. When I was facing Goliath, I felt like it was all on my shoulders. And I did it with God, but yet it felt like I had to be the perfect patient, perfect faith, perfect optimism, perfect everything in order to win, defy the odds. And that hardwired me at a deep subconscious level that to not be perfect was to mean I was going to die. I had no idea about that consciously. That came years later through my work. Like, why is it so important for me to be perfect? And why am I crying over an A minus where it feels like a failure? And as if that is this huge thing. And that's that disconnect, right? Between conscious and subconscious. Because when I did defy the odds, my brain was super validated and like, look what we did. Let's stay in survival. Like this worked for us.
This makes us live.
This makes us live.
Yeah.
So we can't shut this off. I'm just going to subconsciously run this program in order to keep you alive. And then that, I realized, was a huge contributor to why I went through a second life-altering health experience. The second wave.
Oh my gosh. All right. So have you ever, I'm curious, looked on a cliff and seen the timeline of your life and traced it back to even generational trauma, past life trauma, in utero or birth trauma. Because to me, when I hear you share what you've shared, and I've heard a lot of guests describe this in different ways, it's almost like it happened way before you were even aware, way before the trauma, like, consciously could have been processed. Mm-hmm. I remember I was interviewing a brain scientist, and he said that a lot of what we feel in our somatics or in our unconscious mind, which is the body, sometimes can happen a full second before our conscious mind can accept it as real. So have you ever thought about that, or have you dove into any family constellation work? Or Mark Wolin wrote a book called It Didn't Start With You, Past Life Trauma, Generational Trauma. Have you looked into that?
I've looked into some specifics. More so I've focused on the impact of my childhood and then my illness and so forth. But I do know what's so interesting is my mom used to always say, like, I was defined from my birth because I came 3 weeks early and I was born in less than 30 minutes. Like I made up my mind. I'm coming now. And obviously that was super traumatic in terms of my mom barely, I almost had me in the car. It all happened very fast.
Yeah.
But it kind of was very defining of me. Like when I make up my mind, I'm doing it. There's no derailing me. Like now is the time. So it's really interesting. I've always had kind of that drive since young. It was one of the reasons I didn't sleep much. My mom said I was always like wanting to be involved in life and didn't want to miss anything. Mm. And so, I mean, clearly we come here with some very specific tendencies and parts in our personality. And then we develop them, right? And we both weaknesses and strengths. But it was just, I think from birth, though, I had this feeling of a mission. And I think that's because of what was coming. And I needed something deeper and bigger than me to even say I don't accept the odds. When you're 13, I'm not an adult. I'm 13 years old and I'm being told by experts. And so I wouldn't be here without that kind of deeper feeling that I always had inside. And that's what I believe with all of us. We were divinely created to be here for reasons only we can fulfill, but therefore it's up to us to fulfill it, to find it, to create it.
Yeah, there's a bridge between what you're saying where like God gave you this presence or this awareness to know that you were here for something special. And so I can feel that from you when you say it is true. And executing it is totally different. It's like knowing and doing are totally separate.
Totally separate.
So many people start something and they're like, oh, okay, it's January 5th and I'm going to lose all this weight. And then, January 12th comes along and they're like, well, this donut looks really good. So just because we have a thought that's impregnated in the conscious, it's really the unconscious that's running. And honestly, from my learnings and research and podcasting, people say it's 90%. I feel like it might be 95, 97% that actually runs the show.
Yeah, especially, and a lot of neuroimaging has shown by the time we're 35, it is closer to that 95%.
That feels true.
Yeah, so it becomes more so. And then once we hit 35, it's really, because your brain's like, let's just do everything reflexively, right? I've got to control the whole body. The brain wants to just do what it's done before. And that's why so many people say, oh, people don't change. Well, they don't change unless they intentionally, consciously take the action to do so, because the brain is a very powerful player to keep us in what not only is habitual, but in what is protective. And that's why our brain throughout our life, has that data bank of history. And especially the more emotionally charged anything we've gone through, it creates those neural pathways in the limbic system and it stores there. And because it doesn't have a time clock, the brain is constantly cross-referencing that data bank in real time on how to best protect you, both physically and emotionally. And we know from neuroimaging the same areas of the brain are activated, whether it's a physical threat or an emotional threat. Mm-hmm. And that's why my brain, because of this, because of what I'd gone through, it was always trying to protect me from some new potential threat to my life and my body.
Yeah.
And so I was also in this kind of hyper-vigilant monitoring of what was happening in my body and what symptoms, because we had to be aware at all times. And in fact, when you get sick or you go through something, you almost get trained to do so, because it's like, well, how did you feel this? When did the symptoms get worse? When you did this, did that make it worse? And so we're almost training our brain to constantly monitor everything that's happening in our body. And if we've gone through something significant, Now it's hypermonitoring, and therefore it's also predicting and perpetuating because the brain now amplifies anything that's happening in the body. And it doesn't mean there might not be something happening, but it takes it and puts it into overdrive because of those past experiences. And that's what happened to me. Again, I had no idea of all of this. I knew how powerful the mind-body connection was, but I hadn't really dove deep into neuroscience. And frankly, back when I was sick, again, there wasn't really neuroscience. You'd have to go and to maybe a university and check out, a neuroscience
sign
journal.
A book out of the library.
Exactly. And I wasn't doing that at that age. But when I had a hip surgery, my second hip surgery, we had my husband and I, this amazing professional career on TV and film and Broadway. And that in of itself was just miraculous. It felt like I was at the top of the mountain, and I remember sometimes being on stage and just crying because it was miraculous that I was told I'd never do that again. And
did you ever send a clip to the doctor that told you you'd never be married
actually,
and never dance?
I did some, and no one responded. It was quite interesting.
That's strange.
Isn't that strange?
Yeah.
So I did. I really actually did try. In fact, that one doctor had a daughter who got sick, and she didn't make it. And it makes me very sad because I don't think she was given much opportunity based upon the conditioning.
It's so crazy to hear your story, and then really the missing ingredient, I think, from most people that go through significant trauma is the consciousness about what it means to have the will to live. Like just play with me for a minute here. Mm-hmm. So like taking an action is great if you have the education or the intelligence to take the action. But if you don't have the consciousness to even first get the intelligence at the very beginning, then you're really kind of dead in the water. Like, unfortunately, a lot of parents out there, or even that's why our school systems are unraveling. I think it's a good thing. The old adage of like, go to school, work hard, get this job, be married, and then you'll be happy. We all know that that's bullshit. Mm-hmm. We know that it really comes from within. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's our karma, our soul contract, combined with a connection to higher power. But what do you think that is, that missing ingredient that actually gives people knowing and doing and marrying those two? There's something special there. It's almost like a philosophical question.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's one answer for that, but I'm curious, with your neuroscience background and your own journey, double time having life-threatening things happen for you. I said for you. Mm-hmm. What do you think that is, that ingredient that allows the knowing and doing to marry?
For me, I would say I believe we're spiritual beings having a human experience, right? And my spiritual being came here ready to create action and to serve purpose. And I felt that ever since I was young, but then I nurtured that, right? Even if you think of, I started dancing 5 hours a day at the age of 7, that built discipline, right? Dedication. I learned how to fail, right? Because that's a huge part of why people don't take action, because we don't want to fail. Whereas you can't succeed without failure, right? Failure is the greatest feedback that exists. And so I think of even that training as a dancer at a young age. I'm paying my parents, obviously at 7, they're paying coaches to critique me, right? I'm going every day, trying new things amongst other talented people where they're doing it better, or I'm doing it better here. I'm failing all the time, right? In trying to advance in this skill, but then I'm learning, and you keep showing up. And I see that as such a pivotal skill that very often now we're lacking, because we're conditioning everybody to have the emotional resilience of a toddler, to where if I give you feedback or critique, it's not separate from you as a human being. It's I'm attacking you. And therefore we become afraid and almost like we can't fail, because we're being conditioned to believe we don't have the emotional resilience to fail. And no one does anything great without failing.
Yeah.
And this was a failure after failure through my health journey, right? I'm trying this, it doesn't work. I'm trying this, it doesn't work. I'm trying this, and other people are getting well, and it didn't work for me. And each time that happens, right, your level of belief can wane, right? Because you're looking at reality and you're looking at your belief in the possibility. And there's this huge gap that you're still failing, but you have to hold on to that belief and not let what is happening right now lower it. And that's the challenge, And that's where I see just that conditioning as a dancer coupled with being always in tune with my spiritual self. Like if I'm here, I have a life to live. This is the greatest gift to be here.
Yeah, amen.
What can I give? And that together allowed me to have the higher purpose, but the conditioning to continue to fail, no matter how long it took, how hard it was, to start again the next day, while fueling that belief that it was possible.
But I feel the space you're speaking from is actually just true love. Because without true love, nothing happens.
Yeah.
And if love is the only thing in the universe, if God is everything and no thing at the same time, and God is experiencing God's self as Ashley, as Josh, as this table, well, then the meaning that we put on the failures, quote, quote, I did bunny ears for y'all that are listening in the car. There actually is no failure. It doesn't exist. It's just this nomenclature that the humans have learned because of the Latin roots of etymology of failure. I wonder what that even is if you traced it back to the Latin root. Like even in the company, when we have our team meetings, I'm like, don't ever say the word failure. Don't ever say it because it doesn't actually exist. It's missed takes and not mistakes. Like, you know this from dancing. Like if you miss a move or if you're not in sync, you just practice again.
Absolutely.
You don't like shout to your partner and be like, I can't believe you messed up. I hate you. You'd be like,
we have done
hey,
that
babe, let's do it again.
sometimes.
Okay. So maybe if he's holding you above his head and he drops you, that might be an issue, right? You might have a conversation. But essentially, and I wonder how you feel about this, like it's not necessarily about the word itself. It's what the word feels like in our nervous system and in our neurology when it gets processed. So I could say one thing to one person, but based on how they've learned to be adaptable to failure, it's going to feel different in their neurology and physiology than it would in yours or mine.
100%.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Everything to the brain comes down to meaning. And that meaning is incredibly personal based upon our conditioning and our life experiences, right? So if somebody grew up in a very unsafe environment where they're being called a failure, a disappointment, and that starts to be equated to their worth, right? If you don't do everything perfectly, you have no worth. Well, then failure starts to become this huge significant thing that they want to avoid at all costs. But then we know that the avoidance of, quote, failure means you're not trying. You're not stepping out of your comfort zone. You're not going after anything ambitious or great or bigger than you, because failure, right, bunny quotes, or any mistakes, like you said, the learning process is always going to require us to do uncomfortable things and step out of our comfort zone and learn and grow. So meaning is everything. And that's where one of the most profound things we can do as individuals, aside from all the many things in the deeper work and understanding neuroscience, is one of the most important things about your brain to fully embody and understand and constantly evaluate is it all comes down to meaning. So when we are struggling in our life, in anything, or we're feeling resistance that we can't overcome, sit and ask, what is the meaning I have attached to this person, to myself, to this goal, to this ambition, to the world, right? We will see what we believe, the meaning. Like I love Albert Einstein, at least it's been attributed to him, says you can either see the world as if everything is a miracle or as if nothing is a miracle, right? Either way, your brain is going to validate it. It's going to seek it. And we know that with the reticular activating system. They're powerful
Don't think
filters.
of a blue car.
Right.
You think of a blue car.
Think of a blue
it's like
car.
you can't cheat the brain.
You can't. And I wish we taught this, and I've taught it with my daughter growing up, and it's been so powerful for us to really understand the brain cannot decipher really what we're telling it not to do.
Yes.
It just responds.
The universe doesn't hear negatives. God does not hear negatives.
No negatives. It just responds to what we focus on. So part of the problem so much with fear and anxiety is that it's a lie in that we think, well, if the more I think about it, worry about it, we've all been conditioned. How many times have we heard, what's the worst case scenario, right? What's the worst that could happen? Well, no one really understood that in focusing on what we don't want, the brain is not saying, oh, I'm so glad you spent 3 hours today telling me you don't want this to happen. All I heard was the thing, the subject material, the focus, and I'm going to respond accordingly to that. Not only am I going to seek information to validate it, but I'm going to protect you And so now you're fighting this powerful system with your brain and nervous system to actually go after the thing you want. Because if all you've attached to it is the meaning of fear, of failure, of it not happening, the brain's going to do all it can to keep you from even going after it.
Listen, what you're saying is a hard-hitting truth, because I've been getting emails for ever since the whole pandemic insanity came down. Then the email signature will say, "Stay safe."
Yes.
And I always respond back. And the people that work at these corporations, they're just like, "Oh my God, what is he doing?" Like, I'm just like signing off because I was told to do so by my superior. But literally that phrase, "Stay safe, Ashley," or "No worries." That's another one. "No worries." I'm like, oh, so you want me to worry?
Yeah.
Like the brain doesn't process negatives like you're talking about. And I've heard this in spiritual speakers. I've heard this in neuroscience speakers. I've heard this concept in NLP. I just finished a second wing of NLP training with Scott Jackson, who's been on the show, and his wife, Joni Dillon. And they actually unpacked over almost an entire day how truly, on a scientific level, the brain cannot process negatives. That's why my family doesn't watch scary movies. We don't fill our brains with trash. If I see something on social media that I know doesn't align with me, I immediately block it and I don't watch it or engage with it anymore. Can you go a little bit deeper into that? Because if you were in your healing journey and you would have watched scary movies and watched things and absorbed content when you were trying to heal connected to your purpose, maybe you wouldn't have healed. And maybe a lot of people won't heal when they focus on the shit they don't want.
Well, no. I mean, and what's really important is this isn't like a personal attack on you as a person. It's understanding our wiring. Like, this is the human conditioning of our brain, which really only cares, to your point of staying safe, keeping us safe, right? So we already have this internal mechanism that is fully designed to keep us safe and protected, because that means we'll survive, right? It's not built for confidence and daring and dreaming and really becoming into our best selves. That's that deeper spiritual heart that has to work with the brain. Well, but the brain's not just out to get us. If we understand how it works, and that's the root of my work now, we can harness it to also be our greatest asset. So it's really interesting you said that, because if we go back to my journey at 13, again, no idea about neuroscience, and it wasn't even out there really in the world. As we know, neuroscience has really been in the last decade of truly starting to understand how powerful the brain is and all these mechanisms. I had this like real epitome moment where I thought, I have a choice. So I've already decided I'm going to fight and I'm going to not just accept these limits and I'm going to live. But then I had this feeling every day I have a choice. I can give all of my energy, focus, attention into not dying, or I can give all my energy, focus, attention into living. Same outcome, completely different approach. And so that's where I decided to condition my brain every day. It wasn't from fear of running away from what I didn't want, which was very real. And don't get me wrong, I had my moments where I was afraid. And definitely when I would stay up in the middle of the night, some of that was the fear of going to sleep. But the bigger thing was the drive to live. And so every day, if my focus needs to be on living, how do I condition my brain to do that? And so what I read, what I consumed, everything became a focus of reading miracle stories. Do you remember even Chicken Soup for the Soul way back?
Jack
I
Canfield.
read all those books because they were stories, inspiring stories of people who faced lots of different challenges and overcoming them. And not just overcoming them, becoming greater through them, right? It's not always that maybe you get the exact outcome, but who you become is the real hero journey, right? And so I read all those books, right? I read my scriptures because I always believed in God and I believed in a higher purpose and I wanted to be in tune always with my spiritual self. And something that's interesting is my mom and I watched a lot of humor, right? And back then, humor was more humor than what we see today.
It was on VHS or DVD.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we would watch funny movies. My mom and I, we would make up games when we were going to treatments to try to bring some humor into what was not humorous. But now with understanding the brain, we know that humor takes your system out of fight or flight. And so without really knowing what we were doing, other than, of course, it felt good to bring some lightheartedness into a very heavy reality, every time I did that, I was helping my system also heal because I was taking it out of survival, putting it back in the parasympathetic, which is where healing happens. And so I always tell my clients, we universally accept we have to condition our bodies, right? Like we know it. If you actually want optimal health or endurance or strength, it's going to take your active effort.
You're going to have beef sticks and salt in your purse. Ashley came in with beef sticks and salt to the studio in her purse. She walks
prepared.
her talk, y'all.
You got to be prepared.
And that's for your brain health, right?
Yes, absolutely. Salt and beef. That's right.
I mean,
your brain needs those healthy fats and all of our cells need those minerals, right? So we all accept that. Okay. And I can't just condition my body. Let's say I'm training for something. I'm going to condition it for 6 months. And then I'm going to stop completely and think my body is going to maintain that conditioning. It's like if we're going to have to keep doing it. And the more you do it, the more your body does work for you and it becomes more habitual and it's your way of being. The brain is no different. And that's been the real thing that we haven't taught or accepted universally. It's not you as a person. We also have to condition our brain, our mind, our whole life. Because too, as we continue to live, we're going to have challenges worldwide, society, collectively, individually. And if we're not conditioning our mind to what we want to be, the reality for us, what we want to see, what we want to believe, then the mechanisms of the brain are going to take us back to fear, to survival. And it's going to divert all of our energy in our brain to the limbic system, the emotional brain, which is where all fear and uncertainty is amplified. And we know that the more that keeps flowing, those neural pathways, they get larger, they get wider, they get stronger. So they become the default pathway. And the brain can do it reflexively in a nanosecond. So if we're not conditioning our mind, the world will, our life will, our challenges will, our past will, our parents, our friends, TV, social media. We have to take stewardship over our mind the same way we understand we have to do with our body if we want to live and feel a certain way. It's not just going to happen. But that isn't a negative thing. That's an empowering thing. And that's what I really try to tell my clients. Like, people who are super into health, it's not something you have to do. It's something you choose to do because feeling good in your body serves every area of your life. Taking control of conditioning your mind is empowering. It's your greatest mechanism to how you feel and show up in your life. And that's something once you start doing and you realize the profound impact of that, you don't want to do it any other way. You don't want to be at the mercy of everybody else's beliefs. And listen, the hard part with that is it might be the people you love, your family, right? And we've all had to evaluate our friendships, our family, and say, I love you as a person, but I don't need to take ownership of your beliefs or your negativity or your fears. And we've seen that just with society and media collectively. We can just take ownership of everyone's fears and beliefs. And in fact, we're being conditioned that we must all think and believe the same or we're not accepting or tolerant, right?
It's so true. What you're talking about, literally this week or last week, YouTube put out new health guidelines, which basically is going to crush anyone that's giving alternative health advice, which, by the way, alternative health advice is usually the mainstream advice that actually gets you well.
Right.
So it's a total catch-22 there. And their guise is for community guidelines to protect you against misinformation, which everybody knows when I say that, you can hear that and you feel it in your soul that it's not true.
Right.
You don't need to be protected from information. Right. You protect yourself.
Exactly.
So when we outsource our sovereignty to the overlords and the technocrats at Google or any of these platforms, we then give our power to change or heal to someone else. I'm literally handing over my soul to my captor. And I forget what it's called, where you fall in love with your captor. There's something, do you know the phrase where it's like a Swedish term.
Now I can't think of
somebody's hearing it right now, but it's where you fall in love with your victimizer and you start sympathizing with them. I feel like that's what's going on with social media and just with people as a whole. There's this wetiko going on, which Paul Levy has talked about in his book about the Native American mind virus. And I say mind virus because every single input, like you said, where we focus or our attention, that is actually what grows more and what feeds our limbic brain and eventually gets stored in the deep recesses.
Absolutely.
You know, to quote one of my favorite movies, Inside Out. I don't know if you've seen it, the Disney movie. Everything gets stored in long-term memory.
Absolutely.
And it gets accessed when some kind of stimuli on the outside brings it up. So we literally are the amalgamation of every single thing we've been through in our life. And you and I see more things in a day than our grandparents saw in a week.
Right. Our brain is
literally
overloaded.
We're overloaded. We're just like, we're like belching from just systematic overload. Like, where do we begin the process of nourishing ourselves? I understand beef and salt. Like, we get that. We've talked about that on the show a lot, but from a physiological and neurological perspective, like what are the healthy habits, tried and true, that you work on with your clients that actually allow the operating system of the brain to not be captured by these really deleterious things that these people don't have our health in mind. They have their goal of profit in mind. And I'm sorry to be not sorry here, but that's the truth. Like, we get to defend our children. We get to defend our nation. We get to defend our families. Love protects. Love does not just lay down when some villain comes and knocks on your door. Not everything is fucking good vibes only. That's not the world we live in.
No.
So what do you think about this? How do we begin to nourish the neurology and the physiology of the brain in every aspect?
Yeah. First and foremost, you have to become aware that this is even happening. And I want to, when we said meaning, just that meaning of, I need to protect you. Again, the underlying of that is, I'm not tough enough or emotional resilient enough or intelligent enough to learn information and decide for myself and do research. So underlying all of this is a crippling of our emotional resilience, intelligence, and our superpower as humans to get information, decipher, research, think, and decide. So we literally are programming, and especially all these younger generations growing up this way, to no longer think and don't think they have the capacity to do so, because we're telling them we must protect you. Well, that's not empowering me. That's telling me I must need to be protected because I can't handle the harshness, the reality, the different opinions of life that has always been the human condition, because we're all so different. I don't even care, even male, female, right? Or different countries, ethnicities, religions, we're all different, and how we were raised. So we're now conditioning unconsciously this undertide of, you're weak and need to be protected. Therefore, let me coddle you and tell you what is what and who's against you and who's for you and what is truth. So we just need to understand this is happening and almost stand upright and take back our power of, like, we are highly intelligent beings. Humans are the most adaptable creatures that exist. Our brain is this supercomputer that is not fixed, that is an adaptable device that will absolutely respond to what we give it. And if we aren't taking conscious control of that, it's going to respond to what the world is giving it. And we've seen that massively. So I've been so conscious within myself, but with my daughter, of raising her to know how powerful she is. That's not an ego thing. That is almost a reverence for this human existence and the gift of being a human and having our spiritual selves and this brain that can be so powerful, either to hold us stuck and prisoner in our life, or to truly be able to set us free and help us to become superhuman, create our life, create great purposes, overcome challenges. Like, I think too much, it's like we need to live in a kumbaya world, and as far as what I've always said is, freedom has never been free. When you talk about love, freedom has never been free because there's always been evil. And so it's always taken bravery and courage and people to fight for freedom, stand for freedom, rooted in love for freedom and love for the human race and our capacity to choose in this life. And we have to give up the reins of allowing people to do that. And because people will choose, some people will always choose evil. And so if we need to just understand that and then say, okay, this is happening. If I'm just living in this world, I'm being conditioned. I always tell my clients a powerful interrupter when either you're giving information or you just had a conversation and now your brain is replaying it or from the news or social media, is just interrupt it and say, well, do I want this to be true about my life, right? If it's fearful, is this what I want to be the outcome, right? If you're worried and scared, well, if it's not, which usually it's 100% not, what do I want to be true? You know, and then how do I condition my brain, take action from that? And then I get a choice each day to lean into fear or to lean into possibility. That's it. Like at the end of the day, we've got to simplify it. And if I want to lean into possibility and hope and purpose, I better condition the machine in my brain that is responsible for it all. And you know, when you brought up love, I just want to share this so people understand how powerful this is. There was a study done at the University of Ohio where they were feeding rats a super high cholesterol diet. And with time, they realized one of the groups was not having high cholesterol, but they were all on the same protocol. And they realized that the man in charge of this group, he wasn't just throwing them the food, he was giving them love. He was like petting them, stroking them. So they were feeling loved, happy prior to literally eating this food that wasn't good for them. But because they were in such a state of feeling love and happiness, their brain created neurochemicals that literally took this cholesterol and turned it into a different metabolic pathway, which tells you our state of being, how we are feeling, what are we creating, what we are giving, is the greatest power over not only our physical health, but everything in what we see and how we show up and how we see and interact with other people in our worldview. It comes down to us. And I think it starts with a radical personal responsibility that we're also being conditioned to say it's everybody else's job to make me feel good, to make me feel safe, to make me feel like I didn't have doctors telling me, oh, you're safe, you can do this. They were telling me I was going to die and to accept it. But I also innately knew, although I felt it was wrong, a lot of the ways it was handled, nonetheless, it wasn't their body, it wasn't their life. So therefore, it was my responsibility to choose for myself. And I think no changes can happen for you in your brain, in your life, until you take radical responsibility, stewardship, dominion over your own mind, your own body every single day.
Well, that was a huge mic drop. The reason is because I think the ramifications of what you're talking about are no greater seen than with the whole gender dysphoria wave that we're experiencing. And look, I'm totally in the belief that if someone authentically, not because they're being controlled, like they just genuinely feel a certain way, they haven't been manipulated, they haven't been coddled. In every species, there's always outliers. There's always like a fraction of a percent of either male or female that expresses in a way that's not mainstream, that's an alternative gender expression. But I remember watching a clip from Bill Maher, and he's like, we're on track that 60% of men and women are going to be gay by 2040 or something like that. Wow. And I thought to myself, no way that a creator of anything, right, whether it's animals or humans, would ever design a race so that it would become extinct.
Right.
Otherwise, the race could not propagate. There'd be no continuation. There'd be no continuity. So my heart goes out to people, like true compassion and deep reverence for the just brainstorm, truly a brainstorm that seems like specifically young men are going through, more men than women when we look at gender dysphoria. But it really breaks my heart. I've had so many conversations on the podcast. I've dove into the research, and I want to ask you how you feel about this. I want to lay a little more foundation for the question, because it's a really big question. And it is, if we are the sovereign being that the Creator brought us here to be, then what exactly is this dark energy, this demonic energy that is infiltrating the minds specifically of children? And then even more paradoxically, their caregivers, their parents, are in agreement with this child's own self-aggrandization, this child's own delusion that somehow a 10-year-old can pick their gender, but they can't pick their dinner.
Right.
It's just unbelievable. And see, I'm getting emotional about it because I never want this. I never want this. And if the brain doesn't hear negatives, what I want is a healthy family, a healthy child, a healthy son, a healthy daughter. This is what I desire, and this is what shall be. But not every parent has that mindset, because I've been through a psychic shattering in an ayahuasca ceremony. I saw the darkness right there. I've literally felt and seen the face of this demonic energy, this gender dysphoria energy, and it is not here for good. It's not. Like, evil is real, and to deny that is actually probably one of the silliest things you could ever do, because that is where evil goes, is to people that are living in that way. So that's the backdrop for the question.
Yeah.
It's a heavy question because it's so much on the media's tongue, because it's such a sensationalized topic. If you were to put words to the darkness that really takes over the mind, is it the darkness itself that you could put words to, or is it the protection that the brain isn't facilitating? Because it's a catch-22 either way. There's evil and there's darkness, and then there's a mechanism in our brain that would allow us to not be the captor and the captivated. Mm-hmm. So what do you make of this whole thing?
Well, first of all, and I know you and I both, we have compassion for the challenges people face, right? They're all so different. And that is not what we're discussing here. What we're discussing is a compelled, pushed conditioning for our children. And let's just talk about the brain. The prefrontal cortex isn't even fully developed till 25. Our logical thinking, rational Einstein brain that can really make choices isn't developed till 25. So by that alone, we cannot allow life-altering experience, like choices, to happen, ones you can't go back from, before then. If we actually love our children, really love them, and understand that their brain is not fully developed until 25, we're actually limiting their freedom to choose, because we're allowing them to make choices at a time when their brain isn't even fully developed to do so. And we're not allowing them to fully evolve in their creation. We're actually limiting more so. We're saying if a boy might have more feminine tendencies, well, then he must want to be a girl. But we all have grown up with boys that are more artistic or have more feminine tendencies. And we have girls that are the same way. They might have more masculine tendencies. Yeah. I mean, my best friends in high school were all like all-American athletes. And they kind of walked like a masculine energy because they're athletes. But that didn't mean they didn't love being a woman at the same time. So we're not actually allowing us to fully develop. Even little girls, I remember you love your girlfriends, you hold hands with your girlfriends, you cuddle and watch movies. They're like your life before you're kind of at that time of really looking at boys and so forth. And obviously there's always different times when that happens, but now we're being told that means something. So we're actually interrupting the natural development of kids who need time to figure out who they are. And part of that is exploring different aspects. I mean, you look at me now, I had a time frame as a kid. I've loved sports. I grew up watching sports. I only wore Air Jordans to school. I would not wear the color pink, no flowers, like nothing girly, quotation mark, would you say? And that I lived that way for a while because I just loved sports and I loved Michael Jordan and I wanted to have Air Jordans every day. But that was just a time in my development, and it wasn't an either or.
Yeah,
I could love that, be a tomboy per se, and still love being a girl. But we need to give kids the time to fully develop because they're learning, their brain is learning. And what we need to understand is that if the messaging they're given is so one-sided as we're seeing now, then they don't know any different. Their brain is learning. It's making sense of the world. It's making sense of them. And the development of the brain is supposed to be very black and white at that age. Like it's trying to make sense of the world. It doesn't have it's not able to really grasp the complexity of the human experience yet. It's very much like, oh, if there's a red stove, don't touch it. It's hot.
Yeah.
They can't be like, well, if it's cool enough, it still might be red and you can touch it and be safe.
They don't have complex thinking.
They don't have that.
Post 25.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the challenge is that we're making decisions for kids, or saying they can make a decision when they're still in the development of learning who they are, how the world operates. And we've all been through different phases ourselves in that development before we're kind of more fully stepping into who we are and how we think. I mean, we've got to give children time to develop. That doesn't mean there isn't love, empathy, sympathy. Kids go through different things, trauma alters. You know, there's so many complexities that come into this play. But when we really love children, we need to allow them time to develop and fully come into adulthood and their prefrontal cortex before making decisions for them, because that's what we're doing. Kids cannot make these decisions at such a young age before they're fully developed. And it might just be a phase. And then we're telling them, well, now this is who you are. And that's why we see so many huge challenges down the road. So it's actually, the lie is that it's rooted in love.
That's right.
When we really love our kids, we give them time to develop and learn and come into their prefrontal cortex. And then they can decide.
Wow. Okay. So, you know what I was feeling? And I think through pictures. I love thinking through pictures because it allows me to just describe things based on what I see with my eyes closed. And I was thinking of Pinocchio, where the person takes the kids to the island and they have the long ears and the tails, and they basically turn into donkeys because they were lured by this attractive, like, I think it was coins and candy and cigars. You've seen Pinocchio, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's essentially what's going on right now. I think that there's this TikTok, which, by the way, is a communist-owned company. People don't talk about this. TikTok is owned by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, y'all. So you can just do a quick search and validate what I'm saying. No one thinks of this, right? Yeah. What's shown on TikTok and what's shown on social media in America versus in China, fundamentally different. The children on TikTok here, I'm going to talk about what's happening in neuroscience for the brain. Children here are being shown men with lipstick, ladies with face tattoos, and just absolute insanity to literally dumb down and weaken the psyche of children. And then in these other foreign countries, like, children are 16, 15, training with M16s. It's totally different. It's like, what is going on here is so, it's so completely present for me that there's no ambiguity as to what this is really about. It's about control. I'm not interested in the control conversation. What I'm interested in is the loving conversation where we're protected, where we're taking care of our body and our brain, and where we're being an example to our kids. Like, kids don't necessarily do what you say. Right. They model your behavior. Yeah. So if they see mom with like beef and salt and they see dad like working out and being healthy, they're most likely going to do that, right? Regardless of what you say. So what is the mechanism in the brain that actually, especially in kids, that's developing? Is it the PFC where they're learning through parental example? Like, what gets imprinted in the brain when kids are growing up based on what they see? What actually is that? What's going on like a scientific level?
Well, you have to think the brain starts with just, it's open, right? What is what? What means this? Who are you? Are you safe to me, right? Can I trust you?
Yes.
Right? So all of that is starting from birth. The brain is like a clean slate, other than that innate mechanism for survival, right? We're all born with that. And so the brain is trying to make sense of the whole everything. So that's why messaging is so important. And what's crazy and almost not fully fair, but the brain really before the age of 8, even upwards to 7, is where a lot of that conditioning starts and is happening, because you have to think that's laying the foundation for how your brain and nervous system operates.
It's like a rose.
Yeah.
It's so gentle. So if anybody tramples on it or does anything to it, the ramifications needed to be healed for quite some time.
Well, and that's what we see, that someone could have as a 7-year-old, they have an experience, with their father who says, why do you do it that way? You're so stupid. And it's just like a science project. But because the brain is learning, it's like, oh, I'm not smart, I'm stupid, And so a lot of times, sometimes people have to go back and realize, how in the world was that so profound for me that this unconscious belief has been operating that I'm stupid at science? And that's where it's important for all of us to do that deeper work and say, man, I don't care how strong or resilient or tough you are, we're all impacted by life and at a young age. The reason why I bring that up is that what is the programming our kids are receiving at a young age, especially when they can't have complex thinking? I think part of what's happening is the removal of divine creation. And in that, it's like you are special. You are divinely created as you are coming to the earth. And when it's, as a kid, if you tell them, well, you can decide at 6, 5, it's like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Right? And so again, we're actually confusing, and we're going to lead to less security in who I am. And therefore I have to look to the world to tell me who I am. Because if I can be anything, how do I make sense of that as a child? But then we as parents have to be stewards over that conditioning that is coming into our children when their brain is learning. That's why love is so important. Security, safety, encouraging our kids, telling them that they're powerful. I teach my daughter this, and I'll hear her telling her friends, your mind makes everything possible or not possible. So if you're afraid of it,
and you're watching it, you're like, that's right.
I am. I'm like in the other room, like, yes.
Good job, babe.
Personal, just to bring some humor, when I was potty training her, and you'll appreciate this, she was in the bathroom and she's like, okay, come on, we can do this.
Oh, that's so cute.
And she started doing some breathing. Cool. So what I would say is the conditioning our kids are having, we can't trust the world to give it to our kids. We have to take stewardship. And what I'm saying is, let's give them the opportunity to decide for themselves down the road. But in the meantime, we have to guard their developing brains, help them to make sense of the world, help them to make safe in the world. Here's the other thing. The brain loves certainty, okay? The brain loves certainty because it's predictable and therefore safe. When we are showing our kids so much information that contradicts, is not certain, it's up in the air, it's questionable, I want you to think of their brain is learning that this world is not certain, it's unpredictable, it's subjective, which it is those things to a certain degree. But in their development, their brain isn't allowed almost to feel safe in this world if everything that we are throwing at them when their brain's developing is subjective and uncertain and unpredictable and just choice versus these clear kind of laws that help ground them. And when we don't feel safe, we can't think and choose for ourselves. That's the bottom line. If we're not feeling safe, we're not creating safety, the emotional brain will amplify, and it's all irrational. It's all emotional decision making. And that's why we always say never make an important decision in a moment of high emotions.
Don't get divorced when you're moving.
Yes.
Okay. Or in the middle of a birth.
Right.
Like, that's not the time to do it.
Well, here's what I want to emphasize with that. Kids can't have complex thinking. It is emotional. My daughter was 4, and I just want you to relate this to what we've been talking about. Her friend was leaving. Now, I as an adult know that doesn't mean she's leaving forever. Right? She's going to come back another day. We're going to have another play date. My 4-year-old's brain is only thinking, my friend is leaving. The emotional brain is amplifying the sadness, the loss over that. Will I ever see her again? So she leaves, and my daughter is crying, as if the world has kind of ended.
Sure.
And I said, Sophia, calm down. It's okay. And she said, Mom, I can't calm down. I'm only 4. And I was like,
amazing.
Touche, child.
Come on. She just taught you.
She did.
Yeah.
But it's the principle we're talking about here, where she innately understood, right? This moment was so big and so significant for her. And she couldn't grasp what I could grasp, right? Which was the bigger picture of what was happening in this moment and what was happening long term.
Yeah.
It wasn't a goodbye forever, but her brain was encoding it in that way. And that's why kids do act so emotionally and so irrationally, because they don't have the mechanism to think long term. They just don't. And so that moment is exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
We have to understand, as kids, they literally are all emotional brain. So they will act emotionally and irrationally, and they need time to learn so that they can make decisions with everything in front of them. And this is literally just physiology. Like this is the brain. And so I just want to encourage everyone listening that we say all the time, right? Trust the science. Well, this is how the brain works.
Mm-hmm. Trust the real science.
So, trust the science and that we know this is how the brain works for kids, and it's not fully developed till 25.
And we know that because there's actually been PET scans and things placed diodes on heads to show what portions of the brain actually light up.
Yep.
So it's not like we're just making this up or you're pulling this out of nowhere. I mean, this is like a deep field of study. I want to go back because I love this conversation so much. It pulls on my heartstrings a lot, this conversation. But it also is really beautiful because my mind enjoys it as well. It's like a head to heart connection is why I love it. And I knew we were going to get into certain subjects, and I was actually like meditating this morning, thinking about it. I've cried a few times about just the collective pain body for children, because there was somebody in my family who, I'm going to protect their anonymity, and they were abused sexually. And they were top of their class, valedictorian, like super successful. And that trauma just absolutely decimated this person. And they went on to then be homosexual afterwards because that opposite gender wasn't safe anymore to the brain. Mm-hmm. And it's very clear to me that many people that go through sexual trauma that become homosexual, they do it as a survival mechanism. And there's actually research pointing to this in utero as well. Where when the mother is going through severe stress, I mean, not just like normal everyday stress, but severe stress, maybe the mother is beaten. These are really, really backed up by scientific measurements that, when there's studies done, the children come out and they deem the world is not a safe place to be. And so nature, in nature's divine wisdom, programs the child to not actually replicate, to be homosexual and to orient in that way. And look, none of this is a judgment. I'm not here to say that one way is right and one way is wrong. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that there is a scientific component to the way that people sexually orient. Look at even kink or stuff like that, like sexual things that people like. It's because, to quote Greg Woodhill, people, they want to take their pain and they want to put intimacy around it. He said it a different way, but essentially porn addicts go through this, where they want to use the vehicle of sex or porn as a way to assuage their pain, as a way to allow them to not really heal their pain, but to just touch their pain. I forget what he said, and it's such a great sentence. So we'll link that in the podcast for everybody. I wonder how you feel about this, because it really hurts my heart to know what's going on with kids. Once you take away the innocence of a child, they almost never get it back unless they have a super conscious parent, unless they're really on the path. It just breaks my heart. And I wonder for you, like, how do you personally deal with that? The clients on your website, there's pages and pages of men and women across the world that maybe some of them have been sexually traumatized. Yeah. And nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody wants to talk about Underground Railroad and the thing that's going on with human trafficking. It's almost like complete and total cognitive dissonance. And there's a rage inside of me that comes from love. Yeah. There's a loving rage in me that first gets touched by sadness, because anger is always the cover for sadness. How do you deal with this as a parent, as a mother, to see what's going on collectively in our world here?
Oh, it is heavy, isn't it? Because it is love. I love my child. I love children. I love the sanctity of this life, and know that we're all here for a reason. I have had way too many clients that have had sexual trauma and in their own families, which is another thing we don't want to talk about. That's actually been,
but it happens all the time.
That's been more the issue than not, unfortunately, which has a super eroding sense of safety. Because it's not just some stranger. It was the person that we all innately understand is supposed to love and protect us and keep us safe, which has been family, right? So that's where family is the most important thing and can be the most challenging thing in people's lives, right? So I want to recognize that the most important thing for me with, let's say, first my clients is compassion and empathy, and for them to start to understand how it may have impacted them, right? And that's hard, because when something happens to you, you feel like a victim once, but then it's how it changed you, where then it's like a victim again. And that in a way that stays with you until you work through it. And that's a part of that protective mechanism of the brain of what you were talking about, because it's very hard to sit in the truth of not just what has happened in your life, but how it altered you. And I can say that from a personal way, that going back to what we didn't touch on, what happened to me again in my health, but it was very hard. It almost had to strip back the ego of like, I'm a fighter. No, I survived that. I did that, to then be like, wow, that profoundly altered my brain and nervous system. It made me live in survival, not trust my body, feel like I always have to be waiting for the next shoe to drop so I'm prepared, right? Because one thing we need to understand is that when something happens that you can't predict, which is always in the case of sexual trauma, and for me, I was healthy one day, sick the next, when the brain can't predict and therefore prepare, it profoundly more alters the brain. Because if the brain can't predict, it can't be safe. And so therefore, whatever altered us, the brain will keep replaying as a mechanism to make sure we're not taken off guard again. And that's where people do seek other things that almost mimic, or they tap into it, but in a new way.
It was called eroticizing their pain. That's what Greg Woodhill was talking about. So it's exactly what you're just mentioning now. The eroticizing of the pain is like the beginning point for healing, but it just exacerbates the time it takes to heal.
Right. Because you're tapping into it, and so your brain feels we're doing it in
wanting to help
safe way. Yes. But we're not actually really addressing the root and sitting with it. And I think as humans, it's really hard to feel almost that brokenness of something that altered us that much.
To really feel it to the depths of it.
Feel it. And I think people are afraid to, because when something like that happens, you have to survive. I mean, come on. So those survival mechanisms turn on.
Of course.
Because in that moment and following after, you might not make it if you don't just survive, right? So it's a beautiful mechanism. But when we then keep living there, and the brain then is trying to get our attention, and that's what I want to emphasize, your brain and your body, actually from that loving protection, always trying to get our attention to what we need to address. Yeah. And that's why we have stress responses, actually. You know, I tell clients, whether it's a physical symptom or pain or anxiety or depression, those are actually symptoms of your internal alarm bells, of your brain trying to get your attention to deal with something in your nervous system that has altered it into this now hypersensitive or overprotective state. They're symptoms. They're not who you are. They're not something you can't change, but it's very individual to each of us, again, based on our life experiences, our biodiversity, if that comes out more physical or mental and emotional. So in this same way, when you go through something, I think there's some protective guards that come up that want to be like, this will not break me, you know, but the truth is, as humans, because we're not robots, challenges always break us a little. You know, my second life-altering health experience, I'll tell you, nearly broke me, And that was so hard, because I literally used to wear a necklace. I'm wearing a necklace now that I want to touch on, but I used to wear a necklace that said fighter, right? That was became part of my identity.
Yes, yes.
And it was a beautiful thing. But like you said earlier, it continued to predict and perpetuate that I always needed to be a fighter, not access that, but live in it, right? Those are two different things. And when I had a second hip surgery that failed, so I had a real physical cause. They left a hole in my hip, which took years to even figure out, because you couldn't see it on an MRI.
They left a hole in your hip? How do you do that?
Well, in going into the hip capsule, you have to cut into the hip capsule. And so you break that barrier, and they weren't able to stitch it up. And it was in the medial part, the most inside part of the hip capsule. So it's not visible in an MRI. So you can imagine how that profoundly altered the biomechanics of my body. My brain knew the biggest joint in the body was not safe anymore. It wasn't stable, but nothing would show it. We did MRIs, we did testing, we couldn't see it. And that's another long story. But the part of this is that when that happened, my body reacted so violently. And I went from, again, the epitome of health to pain in every area of my body, chronic pain patient, nerve pain in 12 different areas of my body. I'm now being diagnosed with all these pain diagnoses that have no cure, you know, and I went through a long thing again of trying to do everything known to man. Now, alternative, Eastern, regenerative, holistic, over 200 types of the injections we have today with stem cell and PRP. I mean, I threw the gamut at it, and I'm not getting better. And my family's nearly losing our home because we're spending everything on trying to get me better. And of course, insurance doesn't cover any of this. It's all out of pocket. My husband and I lose together we lose our professional dance career that we were at the top of. I have a 2-year-old daughter I can't hold now, I can't play with. And she was my miracle I was told I'd never have. And I literally got to a place where I was broken. And that was hard because I am strong and resilient, right? And I had already gone through something so significant, but living in that type of unrelenting pain 24/7, watching my family watch me suffer, not being able to be the mom I want to be, the wife I want to be, the person, and the responsibility now as a wife and a business owner was very different than when I was a kid. And I'm saying this to go back to the point that I had to sit in the truth that no matter what I'd already gone through, in fact, even though I defied the odds, the impact of what I went through had altered my brain and nervous system into that survival, into that trauma. And so when this surgery happened, my brain in a deep level was cross-referencing every pain I was having and symptom now to what I'd gone through in the past and saying, okay, I need to protect you. I need to protect you. So I'm going to send protective responses of pain. I'm going to send protective responses here and then here and here and here. I've got to protect you because if I don't, we're going to die. And so I had to sit and not only realize that even though I had survived, it had had a lasting impact on me. And I had to strip away my ego because I'm a tough, strong woman. And it was like, whoa, it had a profound impact on me. And I've been carrying trauma from it for over 20 years because when I was going through it, I didn't have time to feel the depths of my suffering. My teenage years were spent fighting for my life in a hospital, right? I grew up really fast. I didn't get that carefree teenage fun time. I was in something that was so significant and took me to just go to new levels. And so I had to strip back all of my strength, resilience, faith, and really sit in the truth of, as a human being who had been challenged to the depths of my soul and now was doing it again, I was broken, parts of me. But brokenness is not negative. It's actually can be beautiful because that gives us a choice and chance now to rebuild. It's the denial that we as humans who have hearts, who have spirits, that we're not impacted by our life. That holds us in that broken, stressful state that then we've got to seek other things to try to make sense or put it together or to diffuse or to suppress instead of really sitting in that truth of how deeply impacted we are. What has maybe created feelings of not feeling safe or loved or accepted or fearful, and sit in it with compassion and love and process it and work through it with that love, allow it, but then take the responsibility to change it and shift what needs to be shifted and say, that was then and this is now. And I don't need to always be held in the trauma of then. In fact, if I process that through, I now live in the wisdom and the strength to really turn that pain into purpose. But until we actually sit in the brokenness of it, we can't rebuild. And that's where I think we're seeing today is we're being almost told we're broken and that we're going to stay broken. And so therefore there's all these other things and it's everyone else's job. And we're going to tell you how to make it feel right. When again, we're taking that stewardship away from them instead of giving them the time to maybe process the wounds and really look at it, but almost get far enough away from it to be able to, because you have to understand the more significant the trauma, the brain is not ready to even allow you to try to address that right then. You're in survival. And again, that's the beautiful protective mechanism of the brain. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't be able to have these horrible things happen in our lives and make it through. But the nature of that is that the trauma, the impact gets pushed down away, deep into the brain. It hasn't gone away, but often it takes years, sometimes even decades later, to where the brain and the body, because the body keeps a score of everything, feels safe enough to even look at it and feel like it's maybe strong enough or it's out of an environment to actually open up and sit in it all, because it can't for a certain amount of time. And that's the other thing. People need time. People need time when they've gone through wounds and trauma to really make, again, big decisions, because your brain isn't even ready to do that. And your body's still holding all that trauma inside of itself. And it's, again, rooted in love and protection. We need to give people love and protection and time to heal those wounds and get to a place where they can, and then decide.
That is one of the most beautiful riffs I think I've ever had on the podcast. Oh. I really felt, I mean, I almost cried when you were crying. And I know people watching and listening were too, because the going to the bottom of our brokenness is actually paradoxically what healing needs. It's the catapult that healing needs, to know that the wound isn't there anymore, that the trauma isn't there anymore. The fact that you cried and that emotion is still present in you, really what I get from that is just gratitude to be alive, that you made it through it. It's not like that trauma owns you still. No. I felt the tears of gratitude from you, that you still get to be with your husband, that you still get to hold your daughter, that you still get to live. We're still here. Yes. And like that, you know, people, especially men, there's like this really weird adage. I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was like all the John Wayne movies or something, where men are strong and silent and they don't cry. I think there's a juxtaposition in that. If you look at the real warriors in the world, they cry and they have a sword. You know, they do both.
Absolutely. Well, it's not either or. I tell my clients that all the time.
It's not a dichotomy.
It's not either or. And I had to embrace that too. Like, you are a fighter, you are resilient, you are tough, and you're human who has been pushed to the depths of your soul. And it's impacted you. And they both coexist. And in fact, acknowledging the broken side is what allowed me to fully step into who I am today. And that's also the tears that I feel, because I am so grateful for the journey. And what I love and why I'm getting emotional is because I see my clients all the time go through the same journey, through their individual circumstances, and step into their power. Because we're also being told, if this happened to us, we're broken. And this is who we are. And there is a huge rise of this victim culture. To me, again, the under messaging of that is, you're not powerful enough to heal through this. It's real and it happened, but you are powerful. And that's why, aside from spirit and heart, that's why I love the brain so much, because we're all so different. We have different personalities, intellect, talents, struggles, strengths, spirituality, backgrounds. There's so many things that makes us all different. But the functionalities of the brain are the same for each of us, which is when we can use it and harness it and partner with it and the mind-body connection and access that. No matter how broken you have felt, how long you have been there, how much you've struggled with your mental health, your emotional health, your physical health, we all have the capacity to change and to heal and to become powerful. And that is my message. And that is what I feel is what I am pushing against and champion. And that's why I also get emotional, because we are powerful. That's what I want people to know and understand. You have intelligence to think for yourself. Life is hard, but it is also great and beautiful. It's not an either or. And you get to also access the beautiful through the hard. And there is purpose to pain. And you have the emotional strength and resilience to get through that, above that, and use it. And the world needs you to do that. That is my mission and why I get so passionate, because I don't want anybody listening to say, wow, what a story. That's her. And that's why every time I speak, I'm like, I'm not here to inspire you. I'm here to teach you, to show you that you have all the same capacity as me. All. Is it easy? No. Is it worth it? Always. It's going to ask all of you, but isn't your life worth everything you have? Because it is such a gift to be here, and even through the pain, because that long-term perspective, So I sit here today, and I got emotional with my husband yesterday because we were hiking here in Austin, and I ran up these stairs, and I spent 4 years struggling to walk. I went from an elite athlete to not being able to hold a book, to struggling to walk for years, wondering, being told I might not ever walk easily again. And now I'm running up these stairs with ease. It's been a 7-year journey to get there. And what I want people to know is we're also being so conditioned for immediate gratification, immediate results. And that's hurting our brain. It's hurting us showing up in our life because our brain is now conditioned. If it's not happening now, it's not happening. And I stand here and I sit here actually as a witness. I fought between life and death for 4 years. Parts of my illness took 13 years to resolve. But now I've been free of that for 14 years. I fought to walk again for 5 years. Now I walk freely and hike and I'm healthy. It's a long game, but it's worth it. And life passes so fast. And like I tell my clients, you don't have to wait to heal fully to live. You get to keep healing and living all the more powerfully in your purpose as you do. And that's just what I wanted to tell people. Like the long game. And you're resilient and you're powerful and you're never too far gone and you're never too far broken. And we need to start guarding our mind and our purpose and our hearts and deciding for ourselves what we want to believe and see and think. And we as parents, it is not society's job to raise my child. It is mine. I brought her into this world. I took on that responsibility. It is my job to guard her and protect her and teach her and love her while she's developing and making sense of this world. And then at a certain point, I have to give her the reins. I will always love her. I always protect her as her mom. I know I will always want to be that mom, and I will when needed. But right now, while she's under my home and her brain is still developing, it's my stewardship and nobody else's. And I'm now being told that it's other people's responsibility to teach her. And we as parents have a sacred duty to take that ownership in love for our kids. Amen. That's it.
It's like, I didn't want to talk to the pitcher in the middle of a no-hitter. Yeah, so much there. And, I was thinking for the past minute or so, I was like, okay, so what does her necklace say now?
Yes.
What's on the necklace now?
This is a necklace I wear and it says free. And
from fighter to free.
That's right.
Yeah.
If I'm fighting to freedom, and that's what I tell my clients. That's what,
and that's what you're telling your unconscious mind as you look at that in the mirror. I have gone through significant trauma and impact in my life. You can't ever take it away from your brain. That data bank, that memory is always there. Yeah. But the meaning is very different now. It's not rooted in trauma and hurt and brokenness. It's my greatest source of strength and resilience and purpose. And I'm free today to live today, because we need to know the brain will always want to live in the past. That's the stronger reference point. If we think about it, your brain has the data bank of your entire life. That's a lot stronger than your future. So I'm free to know every day I get to condition who I am today and give myself freedom to be who I am today, not who I was 5 years ago. And freedom is what we all desire. That's actually it's what we were brought here to be.
Yes.
And it's the paradox that so many people chase. And for so many years, I was chasing like, okay, if I just have this much money in my bank account, then I'll be free. It's like, nope, that happened many times over and I'm still not free. Right. So what exactly is freedom? Freedom is the beingness that necklace reminds you that you already are. We're already free.
That's how we came here.
We came into the world free, and the illusion, in the Logos, they talk about the river that everyone drinks from, where it's the river of forgetfulness. Mm-hmm. And so maybe part of us being here on planet Earth as we go through these journeys with the right mindset, with the right awareness, right consciousness, right belief in higher power. Because without that, good luck. I just don't see it working out. And then we literally remember who we are. And so hopefully by the time we leave planet Earth, we've remembered who we are so much that our life becomes this light to have other people remember who they are too.
Absolutely.
And maybe that's the whole point of it all, right? I wonder, as we wind down the show, wow, I could sit here and talk to you for a minute. we could probably talk for another podcast, which actually we get to do another podcast at some point, because there's a lot more neuroscience for the analytical people that we can go into.
Absolutely.
But I felt your journey in that video, and it's linked right here on the screen right now, her website and her coaching. This concept of bio-emotional is beautiful, because when you talk, I get the sense from you that you like love the brain. You actually, it's not just like you're fascinated by the brain. You actually love it, almost like you love your baby. Like if you could pull your brain out and hold it, you'd be like, I love you, brain. You'd be like,
your husband will attest to this.
You'd be like cradling it.
I do.
So this bio-emotional, like I can guess and understand what it is. Like our biology and our mind and body are one. There's literally no differentiation between the two. They're unique, but they're connected through the same essence. It's almost like, and I wonder how you feel about this, it's almost like if the brain is really a translator for our heart and soul, then when the brain is clean and when the brain is operating at its highest potential, then the soul and the heart can articulate love in the world like never before. And that's why we resonate with some speakers and some people we don't. Maybe it's just their brain is dirty. Their brain is clouded.
Yeah. I to your point, I do love the brain. Do you know, it's funny because it's absolutely divinely linked with my love for humans. I love humans. Like I love people. I always have.
Humans are awesome.
They are. And they're awful too. Again, it's not an either or, right? And we all have parts within us. But the reason why I love the brain so much goes back to that. It literally can be each of our superpowers. And you're not the exception. And that's where I see God's greatest grace, is that we weren't left here just powerless. I mean, I have a deep faith, but intricate with faith sometimes is a lack of control or say, right? It's up to someone else. And I'm not saying that there aren't things out of our control and there are divine plans. And I believe that, but I also believe we were sent here free to choose. And the one thing that God does not control is our choices. There's no stewardship over that but us. And with that is this powerful brain we were all given, but we have to take stewardship over it in order to harness its capacity, in order to choose and condition it for our life. And if we don't, it's the greatest prisoner. And we're seeing that on a massive scale, like never before. But that's why I love it, because it's never too far gone. The brain can change until the day we die. And so many of us feel like it's been too long, we're too old, we're too stuck. That's why I love it, because to me, it's the greatest gift we were all given to access here.
So there's the bio and there's the emotional, and maybe they're literally the exact same thing. Were you sitting in the hospital bed when that came through? When did that phrase come through for you? Bio-emotional.
Well, all that credit goes to my husband. Actually, he has always been, in all truthfulness, when I got to the place where I couldn't find the answer, and the doctors were just telling me, this is in my pain journey. Your nervous system flipped a switch into pain, right? You're a chronic pain patient now. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, chronic regional pain syndrome. Pain is your life. Well, after I tried everything known to man and I was getting worse, I thought, well, if I can't find the answer outside of me, I'm going to create it. And if my nervous system can flip a switch into pain, I'm going to figure out how to flip it back. That's applicable to anything. If your nervous system can flip into trauma, it can flip back out. If it can flip into anxiety and depression, it can flip back out. Like it wasn't always one way. It got flipped. How do we flip it back? What is that process? That's when I knew I needed to create one. Like, what is this step-by-step process to partner, not fight your system, partner with it, to identify some of the physical and social, emotional, psychological factors that have helped to contribute and perpetuate and create these symptoms, heal through, unlearn that stress cycle. Now we're at a place where we can rewire, create what we want. So I knew I wanted to create a process, and I'm starting to put it all together. And yes, it's based in neuroscience, but absolutely takes into account emotions in the body, because that's what people are missing. It's like all brain or all body. And the feedback is constant between the two. In order to fully heal anything, you have to address the brain and the body. And may I say, you have to address the person, because we can't just treat the brain or the body. We have to treat the person, their life, their experiences. So when I was putting this process all together to save my own life first, but knew this was my purpose. Like I knew everything in my life had led up to the creation of this work. And while I was creating it and talking about it with my husband and getting his feedback and telling him, the neuroscience and the body side, my husband, Ryan, came up with the name.
All right. Shout out to Ryan. He's here in the studio right now. So huge shout out to Ryan. It's funny. On 2/22/22 last year, I completely burned everything to the ground for this podcast. The podcast used to be called Wellness Force Radio. That was 2015 when I started. And that was my journey after probably having the deepest connection to God I think I've ever had, where I kneeled on a balcony overlooking a golf course at the Omni in San Diego. And I just said, God, if this is what you want life to be for me, then I don't want to be here anymore. Like, that's not what I want. I literally was willing to die for my dream. And that's where the podcast birthed from. And so I had to wait about 8 years to change the name, because I think wisdom is something you can only get through experiential learning, just like you've gone through. And so it's no diss to a 21-year-old life coach, like their heart's in the right place. But, how much could they have possibly gone through at that point? How much experiential learning, how much true embodied wisdom can this man or woman have to really share with the client? Because energy is money and money is energy, for somebody to invest in them. For anybody out there who's dealing with chronic pain, or just chronic monkey mind where it won't shut down, or just chronic anything. Disease, right? Dis-ease.
Yes.
I think everybody should work with you. I don't know how you're going to do it though, because there's only one of you. So maybe you can train coaches to do what you do.
I'm working or in that place.
That's great. So then you can be on a webinar and you can start teaching people there. To say goodbye, it's the question that made me share my story when I kneeled down and I literally had the largest breakdown I think I've ever had in my life. It was like 6 months where I put my mom in a mental home. I broke up with a woman I thought I was going to marry. And then I got fired from a quote safe corporate job, all in the span of 6 months. And so we all go through these really gut wrenching journeys. And sometimes they're health focused. Sometimes they're just pulling the rug out from someone that shatters their reality, and everything gets burned, which is really the archetype of the phoenix rising through the ashes. So from that question, from that place, from the ashes that somebody maybe even hasn't experienced yet, how would you define the wisdom that you've learned? The wisdom that you've embodied now. What do you know to be true now at this age, being a mom, being through what you've been through? Maybe the connection to God, to higher power has changed, or maybe it's deepened in some way as well. But how would you articulate the wisdom that you learn now to someone that's on the other side of the journey? Maybe they're still in it. They're in the darkest part of it right now. What is some of the wisdom that they can earn and learn on the other side?
Yeah. If you're in it or you're on the other side, but don't feel like you're on the other side of it, right? Because that happens a lot too. Like their life is better, but they don't feel better because the impact is still running their system. The greatest wisdom that I have and what I know to be true is we were divinely created to be here. Life is a gift. The world needs you to step fully into who you can be. And that's the thing. You can be greater than anything that you've faced, that anything that has broken you. You got to sit in it. You got to process it. You got to be okay that it has maybe made you feel like you have in those dark nights of the soul. We've been there, but know that you're there because the law of life is contrast. And the darker the despair, the greater the joy. Like the darker those moments where you feel like you're holding on one day, one moment at a time, the greater the reward on the other side of the joy and the peace you feel in this life, the deep reverence and gratitude for the good that you really don't fully embrace when you haven't faced the hard. I want people to know that the greatest limitations usually are the ones we hold in our own mind, that we really were made so powerful, and it might take time. It might take all of you. It might literally be holding on by your fingernail, as I'm sure you felt. I certainly have felt, where it's like one more moment, one more day, but that we were made to overcome even the most insurmountable odds, even the greatest tragedies, even the greatest heartache. and that you have the capacity and power within you. I see it every day. And that is what I know to be true. Science shows it now, proves it. But what I know, because I have lived, and now through all these years, I've seen my clients live it too, is that we were all made powerful.
Well, I'm not going to talk anymore. The podcast is done for today. You've been watching this for maybe 2 hours or so, and maybe it's the third time you're watching it. So I don't know if you have breath in your lungs, how you could not share this show. Specifically the moments where Ashley shared the depths of her journey and how that's such a universal human thing for us to have just contrast. I love that you said that's one of the laws. You know, one of the laws that was shown to me as we say goodbye, I'll share, was on my Vision Quest. And there was all these people having different journeys in the Vision Quest. I don't know if you've heard of it. You fast for 4 days and you go out in nature, and it's just you, your breath, and the creator. That's it. That's all you get. And some water, but no food. And when we came back and we were sharing, my mentor, Mark, and Tim, they said, you know, most people, they go through these trials and tribulations and they go through this suffering. But the one thing that's been waiting for them the whole time is spirit, God, intelligence, the thing that created us. So they said, you have to leave room for mystery at the table. So I feel like I always leave that seat next to my guest so that mystery can join us at the table, because a lot of the things that we've explained, you know, your story worked out because of the amalgamation of consciousness and your connection to higher power and your level of service to the world. That's essentially why maybe it worked out for you. And I say maybe because who knows? It's kind of a grand mystery, right? Yeah. There's many moments in your journey and all of ours where it's like, okay, I have to give this to someone else. I have to give this to God.
Absolutely.
I have to give this away because the burden is so heavy for me to carry that I actually just will die if I try to carry it alone. So I leave everyone with that. And as we say goodbye, I promise this is really goodbye. Share with us the question that I've asked myself ever since I was a little boy. And that is, how do I live my life well? How do you live your life well? What does wellness even mean? And what is the wisdom that you can share with us on the Wellness and Wisdom podcast about what wellness really is for you? How do you define wellness? What is that?
I think all wellness starts with a reverence for life. When you have reverence for your life and the body that gives you life and the brain that controls everything in your body, that reverence leads you to want to take care of it, to love it, to nurture it, to condition it. And when you have that, then it's a day by day practice. So it's a long game. It's not just a period. It's not just a time, because there's going to be ebbs and flows in all of our lives where our, you know, quote, physical wellness will be better than other times, right? When you have a baby and like life is chaotic, right? There's ebbs and flows, but it's a daily reverence for life, and therefore an intentional consciousness, spiritual, how do I take care of my spirit, my mind, my body, my heart, and the people in my life and my purpose. And I do that day by day. But it all starts with a reverence for the sanctity of life and being here and getting this opportunity to live this life.
Well, I have reverence for the way you've shown up today and just your own story, how you've gone through such a freaking journey. It's how I started the podcast. You've been on a journey to get here, Ashley. And so I'm excited to see where the journey takes you. You know, I can definitely see you on Oprah. I think you'd be one of the conscious voices that she's ever spoke to. There's so many people out there in the world in development, spirituality, that yes, they've gone through some things, but it just seems like it's marketing for them. And for you, I don't get that essence at all. I mean, we learn marketing because we learn how to get our voice out into the world. But I really appreciate that about you. So thank you for being here. Thank you for coming to Austin, being in the studio. You are the 4th guest this week that has cried at the Perota table. So I'm like, we're doing something good.
Something's in the air. It's you though too. Thank you for having me and your energy and love for the human race and for the guests that you bring here and the value that, you know, as podcasters, we're just trying to bring value to people for free to help and to serve them. And it comes at great time and effort. Yes, we got to get you on my podcast next. And so I want you to know that like the feeling here is just so beautiful, which is why I'm sure all guests feel safe to wear their heart on their sleeve and express what is real and raw to them.
Well, thank you. What's the name of your podcast?
The Bio-Emotional Healing Podcast.
Perfect. All right. It's on the screen right now. Also, AshleyDelello.com is her website. And thank you for being here. I've really enjoyed this. This is a beautiful way to cap the show. Until you and I see each other again, until Ashley sees you again, we're both wishing you love and wellness. We'll talk to you soon.
Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you love this video, hit subscribe. That way you'll be automatically notified when new videos come out, new episodes, and also share this video with a friend. If you loved it, they're gonna love it too. Check out some of the videos on this screen that are perfectly curated based on the video you just saw. Make sure you follow me, and I'll see you in the next video.